And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Anthwood Movie Mania. And we are live because it is interview time. Now, my special guest today is a writer, actor, and director from starring in TV hit shows such as The A-Team, TJ Hooker, and Knight Rider, just coming and starring and becoming a fan favourite in the 80s smash hit horror comedy, The Monster Squad, following up with his acclaimed directional debut with Wolfman's Got Nards. So I'd like to welcome to the channel, and so much more that we're going to talk about, by the way, Andre Gower.
Thanks for having me. It's that was a hell of an intro. Thank you. It was good.
Nailed it. Look, like I said just before we started, thank you so much for coming on. I've been like we said, we've been going back and forth for quite a while trying to get this sorted. But it means so much to me for like a little small channel like myself to have, someone like you with a film that I love so much, watching it yearly in and out. So again, thank you so much for coming on and just taking the time out of your day for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. These are always fun, and it's always good to get to connect and meet with new people that you haven't been able to connect with in the past, and that are still wanting to have these conversations about things like Monster Squad and things like Wolfman's Got Nards and things like everything that's coming up that's new and crazy and going on in everybody's world. So it's nice to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you so much. Right, so my first question of the day is, how's your day going so far?
So far, it's good. It's early where I'm at. I'm on Pacific Coast time in the U.S. and it's sunny. It's bright, and it's for I don't know if you have any golf fans in your listener and viewership, but it's Sunday at the Masters, so it's going to be a good afternoon. Once we're done with this, I'm going right to the TV and watching golf.
A good lazy chill out day watching the golf. I like
it. Absolutely.
Right, so take us back a bit. At what age did you realize that you wanted to start acting?
Well, I started so young. I always kind of make the same joke, and so I started when I was 5. And so everybody always asks, and I was like, well, I was sitting in my office, and I had my feet up on the desk, and I was contemplating my next, stage in life. And I said, let's do that. Not really. That'd be really kind of weird and in a bizarro universe as a 5-year-old sitting at a desk thinking that stuff. But my sister is a few years older than I am, and her name is Carlina. And she was actually in this industry, in this business before I was. And then I came along, and it was around it because of her, honestly. And I was always either on sets with her or at auditions with her. And then I got to be about 5, and I just started doing the thing as well. And that's a quite a young age, to kind of do anything. But there's obviously there's a lot more now since my childhood years, because I'm getting up there. But even if you take that segment of each generation that started off in this industry at a very young age and ended up working as a younger kid actor, it's a very small group. No matter even if you compile all the generations together, compared to the wider census and the wider culture and society and civilization, it's a very, very small number. So you're part of this kind of interesting, weird group, as kids that were in the film entertainment industry at such a young age. So yeah, I started when I was 5, and back then usually it's if you're fortunate enough to be around it and get work and be successful, it kind of builds and builds and builds, hopefully. That's sort of the trajectory that everybody kind of hopes for. I started off, doing a ton of commercials and print work. Actually did a handful of commercials and print work with my sister. We were sort of like this, thing that was, I guess, easy because you only had one car to come in. But and then over the years, it just kind of kept, like I said, you have that upward trajectory of being fortunate enough to keep getting asked to do these things and getting cast in things and getting placed in commercials and print work. And if you stick with it, and if you like it, and if you can tolerate it, and if you can blend your regular world and your professional world, which is odd to say your professional world is like a 5, 6, 7-year-old, but that's kind of really what it is. And that's where you start. If you start that young, you learn how to be a professional worker at a very, very young age.
You just said there that you were like doing commercials with your sister. Can you remember what auditions like you started going for, like trying out for?
Yeah, back then, which is ironic. Back then, in the U.S., we only had 3 network broadcast stations. Then we had 4th when Fox became a network, and then you had your local affiliates and local regional stations. So you didn't have that many channels to watch in the late 70s, early 80s. But there was a ton of advertising because that's how television made its money. So there was always commercials, whether it was primetime commercials or daytime commercials or Saturday morning commercials, depending on the brands. And, it's all corporate. So it's all, what brands are advertising and need their products out there in front of what audience for them to go to the store and buy. That's what advertising is. And that's what commercials were in the 70s and 80s and still are today. Just, they skew them a little bit differently because we have the internet and we have social media and stuff that's so much, so powerful. But back then, this was the power. And it was everything. It's big national brands, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, McDonald's, apparel companies, local, department stores. One of my favorite commercials that I did when I was fairly young was a commercial for Nike. And I remember the audition I even remember what house the audition was. There was a building in Hollywood, and you remember these things oddly enough as you do thousands of them. But because you do way many more auditions than you do actual work. That's just how it goes. And this was in a house in mid Hollywood, right? It was right by the Hollywood Division police station. I remember going to this place for some reason. And the original ask in this ad was, there's a kid, and everywhere he goes, he's dribbling a basketball. And I happen to be sports minded and athletic, and basketball had always been my favorite sport. And so I can handle dribbling a basketball, just and then sometime about anywhere, like walking to school, in the classroom, going to the store, being wherever at the bus stop, wherever they had this kid, everywhere he went dribbling a basketball, either behind his back, between his legs, spinning around, all that, which I could do because I was kind of very reminiscent of an old famous basketball player named Pete Maravich, who Pete Maravich, as a kid, everywhere he went in the 50s and 60s, he had a basketball in his hands. So he was one of the original kind of like big time, really crazy skilled players, and he could do anything he wanted with a basketball. I wasn't as good as Pete Maravich as an 8-year-old, but you can always hope. And so you go in your audition, and you just had to dribble around, and fortunately, not every kid is athletic as some. And, if you actually were playing basketball, or if you're a basketball player and, organized rec leagues and school stuff like that, then you have an upper hand, I guess. And I get cast, I get this commercial. I was like, this is a big Nike ad. This is great. And then they kind of changed up the ad, whereas from dribbling everywhere, it's everywhere he's shooting a basket. So, they set up all these crazy things like, he's jumping out of line in school and throwing a wadded up piece of paper in a wastebasket, and he's throwing a newspaper into a basket, and a sponge into the soap dish. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in this ad. I think it was called Nike Sky High ad. So it's about a new pair of shoes, and this is well before Jordan era. This is well before Nike really kind of jumped out of the world as the leading apparel and athletic shoemaker, because they were honestly, third place back in that day, behind Converse and even Adidas back then. And, so I take full responsibility for launching Nike as a brand that guy Jordan, he was a much softer impact.
So it was the Andre era before the Jordan era.
That's right. It was yes, right. We'll take that.
That Nike, the Andre era.
That's right. Mr. Phil Knight, if you want to call me back for a redo of that commercial, I'm totally down.
So you went from being in commercials to TV shows. Like, how did that transition? Like, did you have to do more auditions to get in to like TJ Hooker and the A-Team Knight Rider? Like,
yeah, for sure. Even in those early days, there was some TV spots and some movies and like network movies, TV movies, things like that. At a very young age, and it's all the same, whether it's an audition for a Nike ad or a Mattel commercial. I ended up doing dozens of Mattel commercials as a brand, and got to a point with Mattel that I didn't even have to audition. They just brought me in and I was doing the commercial. So we launched a lot of products on Mattel in those commercials, me and and a handful of other kids, everywhere from things like Poochie, which was a toy aimed at young gals that wrote notes, and then a lot of the Masters of the Universe commercials when He-Man and all that launched. There's a handful of characters that I happen to be fortunate enough with some others to be in the commercial that launched these figures, like Beastman and Hordak and all these guys. It was crazy to sometimes I was He-Man and sometimes I was Skeletor, and sometimes I was someone else, but it's different. And then you get to go home and play with those real toys as a real kid, which is weird.
Did you get to take the stuff home?
Not sometimes, not all the time. A lot of times if you're doing a commercial for, say, like a big brand and a product launch, those products are not leaving the room ahead of time before the launch because they haven't come out yet. And a lot of things, are way ahead of the actual release schedule where the world gets to see them, I guess. Case in point is one of the more notorious commercials, I guess, that I'm in is if anybody that hangs out in your show crew knows the legend behind the ET Atari game, because ET obviously came out, was a giant hit, and they had made a deal with Atari to create a video game based on ET's adventures. And there's a great documentary called Game Over, made by the writer and director Zach Penn, that came out a number of years ago, talking about this legend and this lore about this game that some people don't even think exists, but it did. And if there's this legend that the game was so bad that they actually took it off the shelves and buried like 1 million cartridges in a landfill in New Mexico. And so this has always been sort of like this legend, this lore, that Atari as a company actually went and confiscated all of the product because the game was so bad. And the documentary does a great job explaining why the game was not like other Atari games at the time. And the lead designer for Atari, usually, I think it's usually like 5 to 7 months or something that he gets to program a game. And, this is old 8-bit, video technology that doesn't really, it's all coding still, but it still takes, a lot of man hours, but, nothing like this complex today of this, this visual graphics and all that we've had in the last 30, 40 years. But it would take, 5, 6, 7 months to create a good game. And they gave him like 5 weeks. And he was like, you can't make a game in 5 weeks. And they're like, well, you've got to get this game out by Christmas. And they did, and suffered the consequences. And, it's so what they did in this commercial ad is they kind of recreated that legendary scene where Elliot, played by the awesome Henry Thomas, of course, in the movie, is, out in the backyard, and he, throws a baseball into the shed, and then the baseball comes back. And that's kind of his first interaction with ET. And of course, in this, they recreate kind of the backyard, so to speak. And, kid rolls a ball into the shed and the video game comes flying out instead. So, there's a video game. I happen to be that kid in that commercial. So, there's a lot of I have a little bit of notoriety for being also being the kid in the Atari ET commercial. And I've even been blamed on YouTube many years ago when YouTube was fresh, that I tanked Atari as a company because I was responsible for that commercial. But I was not, so rest assured.
Oh, well, we're back. Sorry, just my phone went off there. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, so it's doing commercials like that lead into your question, doing television shows and things like that. It's either you wake up or you get out of school and you have 3, 4, 5, 7 auditions that day, and half of them are for commercials and half of them are for TV shows and some of them for movies, and you just kind of bounce back and forth to all of those. And when you get to the point of doing all these auditions and working somewhat, steady and then in and out, it just kind of gets sort of in this rhythm and this flow, and you get used to, being in one room talking about, video games, and then an hour later, you're at another building, reading lines for a movie. So, it leads into, because you have your representation, you have your agents, you have, people that are looking to get you work. And then if you're lucky enough to be, for lack of better phrasing, established, or have some sort of relationship or known quantity at that age in this business, people just kind of know you, like I mentioned with the Mattel situation, and they would just call you in, and you already know you're doing these jobs. And to go in and read for cool TV shows and movies and TV movies, it's just runs the gamut of everything that you could possibly audition and be cast for. And like I said, every audition, every actor that's ever auditioned in their life for anything for a period of time will agree that you audition for way more things than you actually get. I mean, the number is very, very high on the ratio of reading to booking. And that's even for established actors if they're actually still auditioning at that time. And I felt fortunate enough to be a part of, like I said, the younger talent group was, a smaller nugget in the giant sphere of film and television. And I think even in that small group of, younger kids that were, from 5 to 16, 17, I think about 20% of the kids did 80% of the work, if that makes sense. And I felt fortunate enough to be in that, kind of upper group that got to work more than once in a while. And, not everybody gets that. But you grow up with all these people, and, they're all your friends, and, whether, you have your school friends and your non-industry life friends, but then you have this really cool group of, I mean, really, when you drill down into, especially in my era with some of the kids that I grew up with that are now some of the bigger names in film and television, you realize, and even some that people don't hear from much anymore, that you really grew up with and around a really unique group of individuals, and some were really talented and multi-hyphen talented. It's like they're singers, dancers, musicians, and comics, and did all this, and they were just all these multifaceted things. And it took me a number of years to be away from all that, and then look back and then see some of my friends that are out there on shows and movies, and being the largest names in in entertainment now, and being like, yeah, they made it and they should have. That was definitely cool. And you think back, and there was a lot of kids that were really, really talented, that had skills and abilities that just are way above everybody else. And it was just fascinating to be around that at the time. I don't know if you appreciated it as much at the time. I think you just kind of took it like, this is my Wednesday. I get to be around these people, and you feel a part of that. So that's kind of cool. But, leading into the TV shows, you just get lucky enough to read an audition, and the casting director or the director of that episode or the producer that's creating a show thinks you look like what they have in their mind and sound like what they have in their ear. And, they usually, when you're a kid, you're piecing it together with a family, and you got to sort of look like you can be related to the other people. And that tends to happen. And, you get to bounce around, you get to go and do a lot of cool stuff. You mentioned some of the, episodes of Cool TV that I've been lucky enough to be a part of. And I looked back years ago and realized that everybody always says I have this amazing television resume and I've done all these really cool shows that everybody dreams of doing. And yes, like that's factually accurate. And then I realized I was like, well, I have done a lot of these different shows that not everybody gets a chance to do as many of these different shows as some of us. And then I realized, well, the reason that I got to do all these shows is because I was available to do all these shows, because I wasn't involved with one giant hit show that you can't go and do anything else on. And you look back at my kind of television network career, I have a run of shows, and it's like half a dozen shows that I was cast as a character or a main character, and they only went one season or two seasons or just 5 episodes. And had any of those kind of clicked on and become gotten picked up or renewed and kept going for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, I wouldn't have been able to do these other shows. So it's almost a give and take of being able to do these cool shows. It's because I wasn't on one show for 10 years. And so I don't know. It's, we all have those stories of the shows we wanted and didn't get. We all have those shows of the movies that we wanted and didn't get or got real close. And, this is a heartbreaking industry when it comes down to it sometimes, but then you got to move on to other things. And, everybody has those stories of shows and movies that they didn't get that they came real close to.
So, like we just mentioned there about the A-Team, Knight Rider, and everything. What was it like? Like, did you realize how big these actors were, like William Shatner and David Hasselhoff? Like, were you starstruck when you were meeting them?
I don't think so. I think you kind of understand. Depends. Once you get 5, 6, 7, it's a little bit different, and then you get 8, 9, 10. Every couple of years has a difference of understanding or a level of understanding that's different. And if you go back to I did a network TV movie or a Christmas thing for I don't even remember what network it was. It was called The Man in the Santa Claus Suit, and it was this vignette story about 3 different stories wrap around this guy in New York City, and he happens to be Santa Claus. Right. And spoiler, he's Santa Claus. And but the guy is Fred Astaire.
Oh.
And I actually didn't have any scenes with Fred Astaire, but we actually met him later on at the thing. And yeah, do I know who Fred Astaire is? Yeah, I know Fred Astaire is something gigantic and iconic in in American film and television history. So that's kind of neat. Also, my dad in that movie was a guy named Bert Convy, who was a famous like TV game show host and actor, and you just kind of meet these people, but you're there kind of working, and it's kind of, you're a professional and you try to be as good as you can be around all these adults that know what they're doing. And usually as a really young kid, your job is there to kind of be cute and say your lines and have a grin or something and get away with it. But luckily that changed through the 90s, right after I became not a kid anymore and I was out of the business for a while. Like a lot of kid programming became like really cool and serious, and teenage years like really mattered. And I was like, oh, I'm missing this, because that's when I was off into college. And but going to something like the A-Team, the show, I think I was late season 1 or season 2. I think it was season 2 or 3 maybe. So we'd already watched the show. I mean, this is one of my dad and my favorite show to sit and watch on a Thursday evening whenever that was on NBC. And yeah, we're on the A-Team. Like Mr. T, Mr. T scared the crap out of me in Rocky 3. I mean, he was not a good guy. He was a fantastic actor, and what a presence. And then you end up meeting this iconic guy who's like the biggest thing in the world in those 2 years. And you actually couldn't have met a gentler, kinder dude. And, this is all a persona and an act. And he's really, and he was a real caring dude, even in late, now, everybody loves Mr. T for a reason. And, but, example, like something, 2 good examples, like George Papard on A-Team. Like George Papard is just Hannibal. To me as a kid, I don't really know George Papard's bibliography. I don't know his filmography. I don't know his status in, American film world until you get older and go, oh yeah, okay, got it. And one of my favorite experiences was doing in the mid 80s. This was the first reiteration of the Twilight Zone. And I got to do an episode. Ironically, this episode of Twilight Zone, when you think about it, is kind of a neat one-off crux to a lot of different things. But it was a Ray Bradbury story, and which was kind of funky, as Twilight Zones should be kind of weird. And it was I was a kid. There was 3 people, or actually, 4 people in this episode, and two adults and 2 kids, but the second kid doesn't come in until the last shot. And it's me and this lady, and we're driving. It's a period piece, like it takes place in the 30s in the Midwest, during the, kind of like during a hot drought season. And I'm driving around in this convertible 1930s car with this actress lady that is very pleasant and very nice, and obviously has some sort of aura around her. And they introduced me to, hey, this is going to play your aunt. This is her name's Piper. And it's Piper Laurie, and I was like, great, okay, great. Didn't really have any idea who Piper Laurie was, when I was 8 years old or whatever I did it, or 10. And but you realize that the reverence that people were kind of working with this pro, and then how nice she was, but she was just my aunt in this episode. And then you realize, like, oh, this is someone who has like Oscar nominations and awards and stuff, and you're like, oh, this is Piper Laurie from The Hustler. Got it. And it wasn't until, a little bit later, because I grew up, I loved watching old television shows, and I loved watching old movies. And, when I was a kid, old movies were, 40s, 50s, and somewhat in the 60s. And also having the kind of, adjacency to my sister when she worked a bunch as a younger kid. Being older, she was around sets with people that were names and things like that. And so it doesn't really kind of throw you off. It's just, this is how it works. And she has a great, I always say it, I'm a little more known than my sister, but she has the coolest credit in the family. She's actually the little girl in the giant disaster movie, The Towering Inferno, with Steve McQueen and Paul Newman and William Holden and Faye Dunaway and Richard Chamberlain. It's all this gigantic cast of 1974. It comes out, and it's this giant disaster movie. So she, my sister is like a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, works with Paul Newman and Steve McQueen, and she's just buddies with this guy named Steve. And you're like, okay. And I was, just born at that time. So it's but you grow up with these kind of stories and these experiences, and it's interesting. And then you these people are important or known. Just because you're known doesn't mean you're important. Some known people are completely irrelevant, especially nowadays. But and I can say that as the curmudgeon-y old guy now, but it's just a very interesting dynamic to grow up in, and then understand as you're doing it, and then really realize, a few years later that, like, oh, I got to do that with that person. And that's pretty cool, because I love this movie, called Bullet, or I love this movie called, The Hustler, or something, with Piper. And then you get into something like Shatner. And, with TJ Hooker was interesting, because I got to play his son. It wasn't just a guest star of the role. Like, I was TJ Hooker's son. And, growing up, of course, we all know Captain Kirk. And you meet someone like Shatner, and you're like, oh yeah, he's the guy that he was Captain Kirk in this old show from the 60s that, only lasted 3 seasons, but is kind of like, I guess there's fans out there still. This is early mid 80s. The fandom world and the Trekkie world had just kind of been around for a bit. And then little did you know, fast forward a few years, you're going to be in that fandom world, in the genre space. But Shatner was great. I mean, he's obviously this presence. He ran that show, and there was other great people on that show, like Adrian Zemed was awesome, and Heather Locklear. Like, who doesn't want to go to work with her every day? And even as a kid, you're like, yep, we're good here. And so it's just Shatner was great. They're not, they don't become your best friends, unless you're, like that, but, they still got a great working professional relationship. And, interestingly enough, decades later, I got to, hang out a bit with Shatner again and remind him that, he had a son on TJ Hooker, and, and got to just say hi to him a few times. And, so that's kind of interesting to, to grow up around these, legacy legends, and then still be able to kind of talk about them, years later.
But with doing like commercials and these TV shows and everything, at that age, did you realize you wanted to do this as a profession, or was this something that you just was shot into?
Yeah, I think what it is when you get involved in it, like I joke about, sitting around my office when I was 5, contemplating what I wanted to do with my life. No kids thinking that. So you're kind of put in this, you're placed in these situations to where you have an opportunity to, take a shine to it, and be comfortable with it. A lot of kids are in this business, and they are not comfortable with it, and it shows. And, when I was talking about the 20% of the kids that do 80% of the work, the other 80% of the kids, a lot of them just don't have it. They just don't get lucky. Some of them do have it. They're great. And they just never get picked for some reason. And that's always, kind of unfortunate. And then, honestly, just in any field, whether you're a carpenter, an electrician, or a painter, or, a politician, if you just don't have it, you're just not gonna do it. And so I think there's a small group that, that have it, and are able to tolerate it, that also enjoy it. So I think 3 or 4 things have to come together, and then it's a little bit easier. But you also keep in mind that, you're a kid, and it's hard to be a kid no matter where you grew up, whether it's in the UK or in the West Coast of the United States or in the upper Midwest, in Canada. Being a kid, you got to learn how to navigate the world and not get hit by a bus and not fall off a cliff and not get beat up in school, and, how to, succeed with other people and build relationships and be on teams and, do what you're supposed to be doing, whether it's, getting, a reading assignment in class, or doing well on a test, or learning your lines for a show. And if you add professional work in there at the same time, you're trying to be a regular kid, that's a different thing that kids have to deal with.
All right. Right. Let's talk about the 80s smash hit horror, The Monster Squad. Right. Every kid or adult who has ever watched horror, who loves horror, with Dracula, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, all them old Hammer horror films, anyone who has watched this film would give anything to be in The Monster Squad. How did you get the part of Sean?
Well, that's interesting. So I'll go into the casting on that, since we've been talking about how you get these roles, and it kind of dovetails nicely into the story. But I'm gonna correct your intro to the Monster Squad conversation by saying the giant 1980s smash hit, The Monster Squad. The Monster Squad was an absolute flop when it came out, and a lot of people don't know this. But we don't even. No one cares. No one cares. It's a smash. Just want to be on record. So ironically, this is just next in line of this conversation of working as a kid. And by this time I had actually been doing quite a bit of work, a lot of TV work. And this just happened to be the next audition. Right. And it may have been one of multiples on some Wednesday in the summer of 1986. And, but leading up to the time to start auditioning for Monster Squad in particular, I had done a few TV shows and a couple of guest spots where I was the cool kid with, leather jacket, good hair, attitude, things like that. And so when those roles came down the pipeline for agents and casting director, to submit, I never read for the role of Sean. I originally auditioned for the role of Rudy in Monster Squad.
Really?
And because of my body of work, like the 2 years before, I was the cool kid, a lot of hair product, and maybe a leather jacket or two in there, and read those scenes and actually auditioned, did multiple rounds of callbacks, and went to the producers and went through the weeks of casting as Rudy. And then a little time goes by, and you get a call, and because how it works is, you do all this auditioning. If you're actually not on a show, if you're auditioning, it means you're available, and um, looking for the next thing to grab you, to choose you, really. And my agent at the time called and said, "Congratulations, you got that movie." And then usually you have to ask which movie, because you've read for 12, in the last couple weeks or so. And they said that monster thing, and I said, "Oh, all right, that's all right, cool." And they said, "Well, except for they cast you in a different role." And I remember vividly being very dejected, and it was like, "Oh no, that was the cool character. Like, he kills more monsters." Because by this time you're reading the whole script, where all about the movie. And he's the cool kid. He shoots the bow. He's kind of the badass. He kills more monsters than anybody. And normally in a situation, in a feature or a TV show, and they say, like, you've been cast, but not the role you read for. We found something else. It's usually a lesser role, right? And it's usually a role, that's smaller maybe, or has less, work days to it. And I knew the script, and I couldn't think of. I was like, well, who are they gonna? Am I gonna be one of the bully, like one of the assholes? I was like, that's the only thing I can think of. And they're like, no, you just got straight cast as the lead off your auditions for Rudy, because they've gone with somebody else for Rudy. And at this time, I hadn't known Ryan yet, and I was like, no, Rudy's I was so dejected and kind of put off. And this has always been the story we get to joke about. And I remember being very, very not happy, about not being the role that you read for, because that's the cool character that I'm very comfortable doing, because I know how to do this role. And and then I actually met Ryan a couple weeks after that, about a month before we started shooting, I believe, and then realized, kind of like, why. And then, fast forward many, many years later, that, the Monster Squad has this resurgence, and Ryan and I and Ashley, we all get to spend a lot more time together, and do all this kind of Monster Squad fandom resurgence experience. And, I tell the story. It's like, could I have played Rudy? Yes. Would it have been different? Very much. It would have been a little bit more kind of laid back, campy, suave, really overdoing it, probably, as I would have brought that. But I know why I didn't get Rudy, is because Ryan Lambert walked into that audition and murdered it, and became Rudy, even as a 14-year-old, or, 14, he was 14 at the time, or 15 at the time, and became, I know what happened in that room now, because, we've talked about the story so many times and done this over and over. And he just became Rudy in that moment, and there was no other question in Fred Decker and Shane Blacks and Penny Perry, and everybody that was in that room were just like, shit, this is Rudy. And and then I think a little further down the line, they're like, well, hey, we've kind of got everybody almost cast, but we haven't cast the lead yet. Like, who should we bring in and reread, or because, like I said, with every other movie, like, everybody reads for everything. It's a small group of people. It really is. And then only a select group of that small group gets, to come in for all these things over and over and over again. And when I say everybody auditioned for the Monster, I mean everybody that was available in our age range that you can think of, that names and faces. Everybody reads for everything. And I never came back in and reread for Sean. They just straight said, what about that kid? What about that kid Andre that we read for Rudy? What if we, wash all the hair product out of his hair, give him a really bad haircut, and put him in some, nerdy clothes, and could he be the lead? And I to this day, it's funny, because I haven't really got the 3 or 4 people in the same room at the same time to ask who thought of that, like who decided that. And from going from a position of being, kind of put off that you didn't get the role of the cool kid, to now getting your hair cut to be the lead in this movie, that's a giant upgrade, for something like that. And it took a bit, but just went right into it, and then cut my hair off, and we started shooting the movie, and I think we all fell into the right, groove. And I think it was the best thing to happen for the movie, because everybody was exactly where they were supposed to be, while we were making that movie. And then the movie comes out and it tanks and no one sees it. And then it took about 19 and a half years for it to get celebrated as we're used to it now. And then we all get back together and relive those stories, and then realize, oh yeah, that everything worked out pretty good.
In the film, you go against Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and everybody. Like, growing up, were you a fan of like watching them old films with Bela Lugosi and Boris Kozlov, like them old type?
For sure. And like I said, especially being a kid who grew up in the film and TV world, at such a young age, you are going to be drawn to something that you're in or do. And maybe I would have always liked old movies or TV shows anyway, but what's interesting is, it's when you're very young, again, I mean, there's no cable, there's definitely no internet, there's a few channels and then some broadcast stuff late at night and Saturday mornings that you can watch old stuff. And the best thing about growing up where I grew up is usually Saturdays. And unless you were but you could wake up really early and you watched cartoons, and then you watched Kung Fu theater. You watched everything coming out of Hong Kong, all these, big martial arts, dubbed, poorly dubbed, action movies, which are just amazing. And then you watch old movies, it's sort of in that. And then a lot of times late night on Thursday or Fridays, depending on your local, like, Friday night mystery or Friday night horror. And you get to see all these old things if you stay up late and keep your TV on, and or you're at a friend's house and staying up way too late. And yeah, I grew up. I loved watching as much as possible. I was always a TV kid. I loved TV shows, and so I probably watched more TV shows than I do movies. But I love movies as well. I just watch a ton of TV, especially growing up, and you catch those old things, and a lot of people, even adults today, like I talk to people and they're put off by movies that are black and white. I'm like, well, then you're an idiot, and you're missing out on everything that informs what you are watching now or seeing, because you wouldn't have any of this if you didn't have this stuff. And those are interesting conversations. It's also interesting to talk to younger people that I'm not bashing on younger people that are younger than myself, that want to be actors in particular. And, they always come up to us and ask, what can I do to give myself a leg up, or what should I, and it's like, you need to it's too easy to go out and do stuff. So the first thing is go out and do stuff, like make it yourself now. Like you couldn't do that when we were kids, right? Or even teenagers or 20 somethings, but like go out and make stuff with friends, like get used to performing, go, and then if you're in New York or LA or region, you can audition, and you just try to audition as much as possible. And Ryan Lambert always has a great tidbit of advice. He always tells people, he goes, go watch everything. If you want to be an actor, go watch actors work, like go watch movies. And then I can't tell you how many times that we have, people go, oh, well, I just don't like old movies. I don't like black and white. And they were like, we can't help you. Sorry. It's like, because those are the best actors of all time, by the way. Like nobody surpasses that today. Then you go watch some old good performances and you will be blown away. And just because it was made in 1965 and you won't watch it, that's a you problem.
Yeah.
But I don't. It's it's interesting. But I did watch those movies, and of course, being the leader of the Monster Squad, which I wear that badge proudly to this day. As long as people want to talk about it and celebrate it, I'd be a fool not to. But a lot of, and it's interesting that, with this resurgence that we had with the film, 20 years too late, now that has gone on for almost 20 years, which is bonkers, to have sort of the status in the genre world, in horror, so to speak. And, obviously horror as a genre has, dozens of boxes of different categories. And it's really the only genre of movies that actually has multiple boxes, as many boxes as horror does. And there are a lot of people that are horror, super fans, horror aficionados, historical aficionados, experts, just horror. And I'm like, those are the people. Like, those are the most loyal fan base and loyal genre, followers that you can actually have. That's why horror always does, kind of well, whether the movie's campy and corny, or whether it's like really, really well done. And that's with all those compartments and categories that it has. I kind of feel that we have, as a cast, and me included in that cast. So sort of this kind of, I call it like, our jerseys are hanging in the rafters of, the horror arena. And, we're retired, from that thing, but, it made such an impact that we were unaware of for 20 years. And
sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I'm saying it to be a part of that. It is really something cool to kind of reflect back on and kind of dive into.
When you were reading the script for the Monster Squad, like, what was your reaction to like everything that was how you were reading it, like as you were going through it? Like, what were you thinking at the time?
If I recall, probably the two things that you recall the most are how Shane Black actually writes to the reader, because he still does it the same way. Like, he actually has a conversation with the reader, in the setup and in the scene setup and in the kind of scene description and production, and then the dialogue. Shane Black dialogue is very unique, and same with Fred. Fred is also the wants to get those those elements and those fundamental basics in there that are absolutely crucial, and to create those relationships. And I remember reading that as a different type of script that I hadn't really read before, because of that conversation that the writers are having with the reader of the script, which ultimately becomes the performer, which ultimately becomes the that translates over to the viewer. And I think probably just the kind of uniqueness of how they write on the page. But then also there was a bunch of, and look, in the original drafts, what a lot of people, some people know and some people don't know about Monster Squad is our movie is very short. The movie that we all know is very, very short. It's like 83 minutes. And the original script was like 120 pages, which was going to be, almost a 2-hour movie. And because of budget, I guess, and just kind of rewrites and, kind of practicality, those pages kind of get chopped down. And then even as we were shooting the movie, they were tearing pages out and rewriting stuff because of time and budget and location, restraints, things like that. So we ended up with a very, very lean script and a very, very lean movie. But the stuff that was ripped out was very, very cool and very, very deep. It was all this big kind of spectacle. And, if the movie, Monster Squad opens up, 100 years before present day, and it's Van Helsing and his, band of freedom fighters, and they're, they're in the Castle Dracula, and they're looking for Dracula. And but what most don't know, like in the original script, is like this was like a giant land invasion with like dozens of warships and like zeppelins in the air, and guys rappelling out of zeppelins to attack all these hordes of creatures. It was basically a beach invasion, and on the coast of Transylvania, and then having to attack this. It was just giant, like, battle royale. And that obviously had to be cut, because I think that the budget, if Shane's actual opening sequence was actually shot, it would have been the entire budget of the whole movie, I think is what it translated to, maybe. So they cut it down, and they even cut down, a lot of crucial things in the story, I think, that either got shot and didn't make the final cut, or just never got shot. And there's a couple big things that were on the page in the script that some shot and then didn't get put in. And then I don't know why they didn't leave those in. They were kind of crucial. And then a lot of it was exposition and story behind, who these kids are as individuals, as this group, how much they know, all these other experiences they have at school with their teachers and with the parents, to all kind of, lead it into that they are the only group that can actually solve this problem at the end of the day, at midnight, when the world ends. And, it was very deep and very a lot of multi-layered and had a lot of great stuff in there. Plus the action and the spectacle and all that, which just all got torn out and disappeared. And there's a few things in there that I lament, not just personally, but just overall that never got shot or either didn't make the final cut. That are big parts of the story, by the way.
I'm surprised they haven't released it on some of the anniversary DVDs that have come out, like deleted scenes or an extended cut, or because that should be possible now, surely.
I think they did a few on the very first Lionsgate DVD release in 2007, part of that second disc. I don't know if they have some deleted scenes on that one. I can't quite recall, but there were a few floating around on YouTube for years, and one of them was the most, I think, a great scene. And any writer that's writing any type of story, but definitely a screenplay, mostly in a feature screenplay, there's 3 acts, and there's a first act, a second act, and a third act, and one leads to the other, and there's a climax, there's an inciting incident, all these kind of writing rules. But any good writer or writers, each scene, each act or each scene and the whole movie as a whole is just a series of setups and payoffs. There's always a setup and then you get a payoff. There's always a setup and you get a payoff. And in TV sitcoms, it's always there's a setup, it's a weird situation, and then a joke, and then a setup, and those are all just little micro versions of that. And then for the whole episode, just go watch Three's Company and you'll understand setups and payoffs of situational comedy. And even in feature writing, making a kid's horror adventure, Shane and Fred are really good at, even in individual scenes, there's setups, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's always setups that you're going to get a payoff later. It may be from the first act to the third act, but you're going to get that payoff. And when you start tearing pages out and you start cutting scenes at the end, Monster Squad, to me, the movie that we see today, I know it's just a series of payoffs that we don't know are payoffs because we never got the setup. And a bunch of setups that we actually don't get the payoff because they didn't shoot it or it got cut. And so knowing, as someone who read the original drafts of the script and the story, there's a lot of things missing in there that you just think are just really crucial to be in there that would make it so much better. And it's just amazing that most of those didn't get shot, so you can't include them in anything, and the others, they're just kind of lost to the to the trash bin of the editing suite. So it's interesting.
When you talk about things like that my mind automatically goes to Zack Snyder's Justice League film, the Snyder Cut, because that came when the original one came out with Joss Whedon. I think that was 1 hour and 57. And then when Snyder released his cut, it was 4 hours long. So the amount of the cut, I was like, what the hell?
Yeah. And just because someone like Zack Snyder gets a chance to, put out what he would want, I think that was padded a little bit just because of the lore that kind of prefaced all of that debacle. But directors always have that. It was director's cuts are different from the release cut for a reason. A lot of times, mostly it's because of time. Mostly it's because creative directors are, if they're usually good, they're very possessive and they're a little bit selfish, and you should be, because you got to hold on to but sometimes you hold on too tight to your vision. And but good ones have that, this is what it's supposed to be, and bring people in to collaborate with them and help them bring that out. And and that's why good filmmakers work with the same people all the time, because it tends to work. I don't know what to say about things like Snyder Cut and things like that. Would I like to have every scene that was not shot in the original pages of the Monster Squad draft shot and available to put together? Yeah, I probably would, because then we'd only have a 100-minute movie, if that. It wouldn't even be. It might just be over 90 minutes.
Right. So in the film, with the rest of the Monster Squad, you've got Horace, Rudy, Eugene, Patrick. Were all perfect fit. Like, how long did it take you all to gel together?
Not too long. You meet a couple weeks before individually. The only cast member that I had known previously was Robbie Kiger, who played Patrick. So he and I kind of grew up together, and we knew each other fairly well, even at that young age. Because, like I said, you're in a small group of kids, and you're always, in the same rooms, reading for the same TV shows and stuff. And Robbie worked, quite a bit as a kid too. I met Ryan a few weeks prior I think I met Ryan and I believe met at Debbie Gibson's birthday party at her 16th birthday party, I think. And we're like, hey, you're that guy. And he's like, hey, you're that guy. It's like, I think we're doing a movie next month together. He's like, yeah. And I had known the show that Ryan was coming from, Kids Incorporated, but hadn't seen him on the show yet. Because I knew the original cast of that show, which was, an awesome Saturday morning show. And had some very, very talented. There's my example of very talented individuals on something like Kids Incorporated, because these are all singers and dancers and musicians that are way above, kind of like the show element. And and one of those original cast members of Kids Incorporated was Stacey Ferguson, who of course we all know as Fergie. And so Ryan is on the show, with Stacey and all these kids. But I also knew Jason Hervey, who played EJ, and Adam Carl, who played the other bully, Derek, I believe. And just, because we're all in the same industry and same age. Brent Chalem, who played Horace, was actually fairly new to the indie. He just kind of started out a year or two before that. He was a year or two younger than me, so I actually never we never crossed paths, leading up to that. And of course, Ashley Bank, who played Phoebe, was, she's just a little 5-year-old Spitfire, and hadn't really met her either. Michael Faustino, who plays Eugene, who's one of my favorite characters in the movie, by the way, because he barely says anything. I love it. Is actually a contemporary of mine. He's David Faustino's younger brother, and David Faustino, everybody knows, is Bud Bundy from Married with Children. And and Michael's just the younger brother. So I actually knew Michael as like a young kid, like because David and I were the same age and we were pals of some level, but didn't know really anybody else. And you get there. It takes a little bit of figuring out who's who, what's what, all at the same time. You got to go to school every day, and you got to be in the same room with the school teacher on set, and then a knock comes on the door and be like, hey, in 15 minutes, we're doing scene 25, so get ready. And then you got to go out and you got to work with each other. And that starts from day one. So, it takes a little bit of time. We worked on this movie for about 3 months. And, there was some, there was some, learning curve, figuring it out. You're still a bunch of kids working together and figuring out who's who. And are we a bunch of hooligans running around? Are we going to be super professional? Are we going to be causing problems? Like, no one wants to do that, especially as a kid. And I always kind of had that mentality either naturally or nurtured into me that, no one wants to work with kids. That's the rule. W.C. Fields never worked with kids or animals. And we actually had both, and creatures and effects and stuff like that. And other big time, method actors that, I'm sure Fred, is trying to run this set and it's going crazy. But, as I always kind of had the mentality as the younger person on most sets is you understand that no one wants to work. There's kids on set and it's just a pain in the ass because of time constraints about rules and regulations and laws and things you can and can't do when kids are around. Your time on set is restricted. So everything's got to be very, very precise and on a schedule. Otherwise you lose time, you lose scenes, and that's losing money. And producers and first ADs hate that. And I always viewed it as you never want to be the reason something goes bump. You never want to be the reason that someone can point, oh, the kid fucked that up. The kid's the reason we didn't make our day. And because then you just don't want that resentment. And, but when you have an ensemble of kids, it's kind of tough because everybody was different ages and those are different restraints. So Ashley and Michael could be at work for, I think it's something like 8 hours a day. And you have to have 3 hours of school a day minimum. So then, if it's 9 hours, then that's only 6 hours that you can actually work, but you could technically be in front of camera for a few. It is crazy with the restrictions. And as you get older, the time spreads out a little bit more. So you have to do this scheduling, really wacky, and it's very, very complex and hard to do. We're just there showing up, trying to do our job and doing our thing. And, the adults that are making the movie actually are, just pulling their hair out, trying to, make these schedules. Because then you got creature stuff. You've got 4 hours of makeup over here. You've got special effects that aren't working over here, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite complex and stress inducing, I'm sure. But, as the kid that was there for almost every day and I'm in almost every scene, as the character, there's only a few that, we're not in as the kids, or I'm not in, with the adults or something. Yeah. And it's a long work schedule, but, I think we gelled, and I think it comes across that, we were a group of kids that knew each other pretty well. And, you got the little badass sister that's always kind of around and wants to be part of it. But, it's that, kind of stereotype of, go away, little sister, you're annoying. And she ends up being the hero of the movie, which most people don't really get or appreciate. Yeah. It's our 5-year-old girl is the hero of the movie, which, is kind of cool, because we don't do it. Like we can't do it. Like we get to the point that it's like, we're ineffective here. We are not the power. And she ends up saving the day.
Right, in the film, the clubhouse looks amazing. Like during takes, did you just hang out in that clubhouse?
No, not really. I mean, the clubhouse, the tree house that was actually treehouse exterior, they built that in a tree out north of town, and that was actually a real thing. That, again, as rules, we weren't technically supposed to be in. And then there was actually 2 instances where Ryan goes up there, and then I actually go up there in a shot, which we weren't allowed to do, but we got away with it. But the interior was basically just a set built on a stage. And it was very small. It was very small, very cramped. All these movie posters and magazine articles and figurines and toys and stuff in this space. And no, we didn't really hang out, because you can't. It's a set. It's an active set. You're not going to hang around in there and dork around a little bit and ruin anything. And then when you put like 5 of us and Tom Noonan as Frankenstein's monster in there, like that's a small box to be sitting in for an extended period of time. But it was really kind of cool. It's probably I would say it's probably one of the cooler set builds that we actually had. Very, very close to first place when we're down underground finding the amulet and all that. We drop down. We're in kind of like these catacombs of this old house. That was all a set build. That's all made by hand. It's just rock and these rooms and all. That was actually pretty cool to see too.
Yeah, that is pretty. Like, before I move on to my next question, where you guys enter that house and then you kick Horace kicks Wolfman in the nads, and you've got the Wolfman coming that way, the brides of Dracula coming that way, and it's such an awesome scene, and then you're like, oh, haven't you seen the Hardy Boys? The full deliver.
Right. Well, so that's 2 things there. The Hardy Boys reference is actually is a payoff that you don't get the setup, like I was mentioning before, because going back to the dozen or so pages of just the kids' backgrounds that were taken out. That's what we do on a daily. We're the weird kids. We're reading Hardy Boys. We're reading names. We're reading Mary Shelley. We're reading the Fangoria, the magazine. We're reading all of this stuff about movies and monsters and real monsters and TV monsters. And so we know that if you're in a situation that there's going to be a trap door. Why? So then we had to throw it in the line of like, it's in the Hardy Boys, which is hilarious to me. The other thing is that, you mentioned that shot where we're in the house and, we obviously kick Wolfman in the nards, becomes iconic, that we were not expecting. But us being in that house is a perfect example of rewriting of what the original scripts were. And in the original script, it was a much longer sequence. And when we enter into the house, there's a guy there, and we're like, well, who are you? Oh my God, who are you? We thought this house was abandoned. He's like, oh, and I think he says he's something like, I'm Van Helsing's great grandson, and I'm here tracking down his thing, and maybe you can help me. And we're like, yes, we need some help. We've been trying to tell everybody because no one believes us, et cetera, et cetera. And what's perfect is right before then, talking about setups and payoffs again, is just prior to that, we are at Scary German Guy's house getting the
with the book,
the book translated. And as we leave, he has the thing. He's like, well, you might have thought I was always some sort of monster. It's this old weird guy in the neighborhood. But he's like, well, maybe a vampire, but I wouldn't have a reflection if I was. And we're like, whoa, this guy knows about monsters like we do. That's really cool. We all get distracted by the Holocaust reference, right? So he's a concentration camp survivor. So and most kids don't know what that's happening. When the movie came out, no one knew what that meant.
Yeah.
No one knew what that meant. But so we're, in the characters in the movie are focusing on, oh, this old guy knows about vamp, it's in a reflection. So now fast forward to, we're in the house and there's this guy, and they actually cast this guy. He was on set for all day or maybe 2 days while they're rewriting and ripping pages out of the script to shoot this stuff in this house. And it was actually a guy that they had read for the role of Dracula and really, really liked. But Duncan Regehr came in and became Dracula. And so they kept this guy in mind and brought him on set. And he was a young Irish actor named Liam Neeson. And so Liam Neeson was on our set for a day or two waiting to do the scene, and they never did it. And he was playing this guy that, as we go into the weird house, the mansion house, says, I need your help. And so we go into the house and with him and get deeper and deeper. And because of the reference of Scary German Guy's reflection knowledge of vampires, we're walking down the hallway. And I remember in the script, it's my character notices as we're walking down the hallway, Sean turns and looks at this old, really weird mirror, this old, kind of like decorative mirror in the hallway or whatever, and sees everybody there except for that guy.
Oh, wow.
And I think he's wearing I think Fred had it. It was like a floating rubber mask or something. Like he's being deceptive Dracula. So it's Dracula and luring us into this house because he can't get the amulet out of the room because it's protected. He would need us to get it, and then we're going to get kaput, and then he goes off because that's how Dracula roll. And so as soon as my character in the original pages sees that, Sean knows we're in trouble, and we run. And so we try to run, and then we end up going through different doors and stairwells and trap doors and all this stuff. And we keep bouncing down into different levels of this house. It's not just once, it was multiple times. And on every level, we run into one of the monsters, and we have to escape the monster on each level. As they ended up doing it, they compressed it all into the one main floor. Still a great looking shot. Although it's always interesting when we talk about that scene. And I don't know if it was intentional or just completely a mistake, but normally when you have a storm and lightning's crashing and lights flicker, right? It's the lightning crashes and the lights flicker because the power surges and lights go out. If you look at Monster Squad in this weird house, when the lightning crashes and the power surge, lights come on. That's really weird. It's totally opposite. But, so yeah, we go down and we actually did that stunt. We went through the trapdoor ourselves. That was kind of cool. It was a little like, is this going to hurt or not? But, and it's also odd that they allowed us to do that. But it was me, Michael, the dog, and Brent that went through this door and landed on pads and boxes. And it looked great because it's a great jump. We just drop out. And but I always liked that longer sequence. And to me, once I see that reflection, or that when in my mind, when Sean sees that reflection and goes, zoinks, like it's like, oh, it turns into an episode of Scooby-Doo because now we're jumping from there and we're getting chased on every different levels to me, and we're going in and out of rooms. It was just big, long chase scene. And it to me, it was an episode of Scooby-Doo. It was great. It was great.
Right. So to join the Monster Squad, you have to pass the monster test. Can I don't know if you remember the questions, but can I put myself forward to you and try and take that test and become an honorary member of the Monster Squad?
You're applying for membership, is what you're doing.
I am.
Okay,
I
let's see.
be...
What are the 2 ways to kill a vampire?
Oh, sunlight and a steak. Sunlight. Yep.
Yep, that's right. What and this is a little deeper, but how do you the best way to kill the only way to kill a werewolf?
A silver bullet.
It can be a silver bullet, and that's easy. But werewolves have been around for I think it's anything silver technically. Like you could hit them with a mash them with a silver mace, or you could stab them with a sword made of silver. I think it still gets it, because werewolves were not invented shortly after gunpowder. I don't think so. I don't think you just had to have a silver bullet. I think they go back much further. So anything silver. And the answer is not falling out of a window onto a bar. That is not the answer. So I think you passed. Like you got 2 out of 2. You're good. You're in.
Yeah, you hear that, everyone? I am an honorary member of the Monster Squad.
Absolutely, you're
lifelong dream right there.
You're in the goddamn club.
Oh, speaking of which, that line is, every time I watch it, I think it's such a badass line. Where he goes, he's like, where are you going? I'm in the goddamn club, aren't I? Oh,
right. Because we don't ever really kind of finish his monster test. Like we just kind of leave it hanging. And he's like, am I in or what? And I proudly say you're in the goddamn club, because Ryan and I share his line now, with our friends and our fans. And we can use it together. Even though it was his character's line, I can still use it. Because I did originally read for that role, so it's good. It makes sense. It makes sense.
Right, the prosthetics in this film look amazing, especially the werewolf transformation scene. Like that, even where he's in the police station, where he starts shooting lock me up. That's like a great scene as well. Like I love that.
Oh, that's one of the better scenes in the movie, for sure.
Yeah, I love it. He played a werewolf in Fright Night Part 2. Again, another great film, another horror film that I love loads, that doesn't get enough recognition in my eyes.
Right.
What was your reaction to seeing all these monsters in full prosthetics?
I mean, it was mind blowing, really, to kind of see, because you don't, as the kids in the movie, or you're not seeing all of the months of prep work that they're building and figuring out how to make all these monster characters. Later on, especially making the documentary, you're seeing, you see the how much work went into all that, and how much innovation with this team of artists that were working out of Stan Winston's shop at the time put into this. Because what you can appreciate after the fact is that this group of guys that worked on these individual monsters for the Monster Squad, all working out of Stan Winston's shop in 1986, 87, all went on to become the leading creature makers in film. They all went and had their own shops, or teamed up and opened them shops. And some of them are still around. 1 or 2 just recently retired. But people like Steve Wang, who made Gilman, and him and Matt Rose created a new way to build a suit that hadn't been done much of them. And they painted it. Steve Wang is known for his design and paint schemes. And if you look at another movie that team of Stan Winston artists jumped on, if the lore of the original Predator, they had an original alien suit as the Predator, and a different actor in that suit. If you don't know that story, go research it. It's bonkers. What we ended up with was much better. If you look at that Predator, it's because Steve Wang. Look at that Predator and look at our Gilman. It's very similar, because it's kind of the same people working on it, which is all in the same time period. But to be on set and to see the different iterations, different stages of, and then of the performers in the suit, because everybody had it to perform. If you're in Michael McKay and that mummy, put together is unreal. I mean, it's Michael's this little tiny guy anyway, but there's this bodysuit of linen and muslin, and then it kind of wraps around, and it was all these different pieces. Then the face, but nobody gives our mummy enough credit. I think is one of the best. He's amazing, because everybody looks at Gilman and they all look at Wolfman, and the Gilman suit, because of Steve Wang and Matt Rose creating a new way to build a suit, that changed the game. Now suits are made. This is how suits are made. They changed the paradigm. And then like Wolfman was very interesting because the detail, it was old school versus new meeting new school, and that was it was like a football helmet that had wires in it, so the stuff where his ears or his eyes are moving or snarling or whatever, that's all done with like wires and remote control and actual physical kind of tension pulleys of a guy. His name's Carl Tybalt. That's in Jonathan Greaves. Jonathan Greaves plays the guy who turns into werewolf. And then when Wolfman is Wolfman, it's a guy named Carl who had to perform in this giant hulking suit that you couldn't really see out of, and just have all this stuff going on. But then when you look at the detail of the latex and the foam, and the articulation of the ears and the snarling for 1986, it was insane, absolutely insane. And no digital effects to enhance it. You just plug it in. Now we plug into an AI and make a Wolfman. It's a little bit different. And for 20 years prior, we plugged into a computer system that enhanced or just created your monster. But this was all 100% practical stuff, and it was really quite interesting to be around all of that, on a day-to-day basis for those 3 months, and and then to see kind of how it all comes together.
You went on to direct like a follow-up in the documentary Wolfman's Got Nards. What was it like revisiting the film, talking to cast members and everyone who loves that, everything about it?
Yeah, it really, where the documentary kind of came from was, we didn't know we were going to have this resurgence starting in 2006, 2007, and which is literally 20 years after the fact. And we thought this movie was still just kind of dead and had a handful of people that remembered it, and that was it. And then we did it all started with a kind of like a cast screening at the original Alamo Drafthouse Theater in Austin, Texas in April of 2006, I believe. And they got their hands on a 35 millimeter print. They invited myself and Ashley and Ryan and Fred Decker to come to Austin for the weekend. And we were like, who wants to see this movie? Like, people want to see this movie. And, we hadn't done anything ever, for Monster Squad before. And we're like, this is either going to be really, really fun or real, just a bomb. Like, no one's going to show up like they did 20 years ago. And they sold out 2 shows the Saturday before Easter in Austin. And because of the timing of 2006, now we had the internet and early social media, chat rooms, and the fan base just connected because this got some coverage from the fandom. And then that led to going to our next thing a year later, or later in the year. We headlined a convention in New Jersey that all these fans came out, and we were like, what is happening? I was like, this is really weird. And then that started building and building and building and building and building and building and building over the next, really 10 years. And we honestly thought the resurgence would last about maybe a year or maybe 2 summers, and then we'd never talk about Monster Squad again. And it just hasn't stopped. It's been now, like I said, it's been 20 years since then, almost, and it's insane. So coming into the 30th anniversary year, which would be 2017, we've had 9, almost 10 years of this convention, special screenings, resurgence. The DVD came out in 2007. They launched that at San Diego Comic-Con, and Lionsgate, sold hundreds of thousands of, DVDs. And it was all kind of fun and great and interesting. And you go, you get brought to all these places. But what I ended up realizing is that for some reason, this movie connected with these individuals on a level and in a way that I hadn't really seen any other movies and fandom. Fandom's fandom, right? Oh, we love this movie. It's great. I'm a fan. Yada, yada. Great. That's not what Monster Squad fans are. They are really connected and tied and were impacted by this movie for some reason. And it took a number of years to actually realize that that was something interesting, because we were just kind of taking it for granted, I think, for a little bit. Oh, this is great. When's it going to end? And I realized that it's not ramping down. It's ramping up, because now the word's getting out there, and even more people want to meet us. More people want to see this movie in the big screen. They're selling more DVDs, et cetera, et cetera. Then a Blu-ray came out. Then another Blu-ray came out, and I'm like, what is this? Because all these people come up to us and tell us their story of where they first saw this movie, how they saw it, who they saw it with, what this movie meant to them, whether they saw it when they were 10 or whether they saw it they were 22 in college, whether they saw it as a teenager because their older brother brought it on a VHS and showed them this movie. And for some reason, something with these, and it's all individual, it made an impact, and it just made this connection. And what's interesting is made that connection even better is in the early days, because this movie disappeared for 19 and a half years. And these fans went around and held it dear to them, and either had their VHS or their copy that they, recorded off of HBO that it ran for, 2 or 3 years, nonstop. Or they went and got it at the local video store and ended up just stealing the VHS, or, the store manager just said, quit coming in my store. Just take the movie. Just like here. And once you hear that exact story 3 dozen times, you realize that it's not just one kid that stole the movie. I'm like, something happened with these kids when they saw this movie. And I thought that was an interesting dynamic. And then I realized that we're benefiting from it, because we're still going out and going to these screenings and going to these shows and going to Comic-Con and going to conventions, and people are writing us online. And Ryan and I are now working together on we had a podcast for a year or so. And then I created a show that I sold to Legendary Studios and Nerdist, where we were co-hosts, and we showcased short films, and, kind of all at the same time. We're all kind of, getting to spend more time with each other. And like I said, Ryan and I had a brand together for a while. It was great. And I was like, I think there's a story here. I think there's something interesting. It's like, why don't we go find a friend? Because we've got the 30th anniversary year coming up. So I'm thinking this a year in advance. And I was like, we're going to go 3 or 4 big conventions, I'm sure. And then we've got a couple screenings. Why don't we get one of our friends that has a camera, that knows how to shoot shit? And, we'll just go do some interviews with the fans that we know here. And then we'll go on the road on these shows and just kind of capture some of that dynamic. And then we'll put together a little short. And, maybe it's a little short, kind of fan appreciation, kind of bit. Talk a little bit about the movie in the background, and maybe we'll get some of the cast members to, to kind of sit down and make a little short documentary or something, because I was doing the show about short films. And so shorts were a little bit more in my mind, and shorts are a lot cheaper to make. And, I wasn't going to spend any money on this documentary idea. And I got very lucky, because I ended up going to lunch with a dear friend of mine one day who works at a studio at Pilgrim Studios at the time. And I pulled up to pick her up. She came out of the door, and we were about to drive off. And what's so interesting is that if I had said, let's go to lunch, and driven off, we wouldn't be talking about this today. And she said, hey, you remember I always mention there's 4 or 5 guys on my floor that are big Squad fans. I was like, yeah, you did mention that. She goes, well, one of them's right over there in the parking lot. And so I said, oh, call him over. And so I stopped. I think I'm double parked in the middle of the street, and I stopped the car, and we get out and we go meet this guy. And his name is Andrew. And he happened to be a production production guy at this company. And so we lingered and met him, and he's like, "Oh my God, this is so cool. It's big fan. Thanks for stopping by." And I said, "That's awesome. So we'll come in. Like next time I come in, we'll, I gotta, see you in your office or whatever, and I'll bring my friend, when I come visit my friend Jen." And while we were interacting with Andrew, 3 other dudes came out of the front door and walked down the sidewalk. And if they had turned right, we wouldn't be talking about this today. But they turned left to go to their car. And it was 3 guys. It was Aaron Kunkel, Henry McComas, and Wesley Caldwell. And they all worked at the studio as filmmakers and production guys and storytellers. And they ended up all being fans. And I didn't. So now I'm having another conversation with these guys. And lo and behold, they were like, "Hey, well, we need to go to lunch and talk about cool stuff." And we went to lunch the next week with these 3 guys, and we were talking about projects that I had, on deck that I was trying to pitch and get done. And I mentioned the documentary, and they were like, "Whoa, wait, hang on a minute. You're thinking about doing a Monster Squad documentary. That's what we do here. What were you thinking about doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm thinking about doing some rinky-dink type of thing to put on our, our website and, sell for $1 or something, and just do this kind of like 30th year fan appreciation type, thing." Ryan and I were, I was like, just do it kind of crappy. And he's like, "Hang on a minute. I think we can look at something bigger, better." And because of that, I went in and, we worked together for, I don't know, a very short amount of time with Henry and Wes and Aaron at Pilgrim, and came up with a pitch to the executives, and made it a pretty good, win-win situation for them. And they greenlit like a big production. It wasn't that big. The documentary, because of this team that I worked with there, made it look like $1 million documentary, and it was not. And that shows the skill and the effort and the intensity that these guys brought to that. And we went right into production on making documentaries. So I got to bring this production team out with me, and we just elevated everything that my original terrible idea was going to be. And never would have dreamt that it would have been the scope, the scale, and the quality that we ended up with Wolfman's Got Nards. And that has everything to do with Henry McComas, Wes Caldwell, Aaron Kunkel, Jen Off, Eric Klakowski, Shane Patterson, all of these guys that worked on this movie in a small group at Pilgrim Studios in 2017. And for 10 months on the road, I went everywhere with this team, and I think we put together a pretty good documentary explaining. We definitely got what I wanted out of it, is to explain this fan impact and how these, kids connected with this movie and why, and what that means to them and how it shaped or changed their lives. And then we went into the history of the movie, went to the history of the people that worked on it. And this thing just got, bigger and deeper and better than I could have ever imagined. And then Henry's storytelling ability of, cutting this movie together, just really kind of like nailed it. And, I try not to take, barely any credit for what Wolfman became, but because it's these guys did so much work on it, and really brought their, their enthusiasm and their A game to something that they really cared about. And these are the guys that I'm still working with and making projects with today.
We hit on it. You mentioned it a bit earlier on, like going to Comic Cons. Like, what does it mean to you? Like, hearing all these fans talk about the film and what it meant to them, like after all these years, like going from new generations to keep going like on and on and on. What does it mean to you about what it means to them?
Yeah, I think it goes in stages. At the very beginning, honestly, it's a neat, it's nice attention. It's a good ego stroke, when you got people going, "You don't understand what you and this movie mean to me." You're like, who doesn't want to hear that? And that's what I thought. He was like, "Oh, people are just giving it lip service and, being nice because they're in front of you or something like that." Mm. And it took a little bit, honestly. It took a couple of years to realize that they are not bullshitting you. And they are genuinely connected to this movie and genuinely appreciative of being in front of you and meeting you and interacting with you because of this movie. It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with this movie. So you almost, then you have to take the self out of it and realize that it was this impact of this movie and the story and these characters and these creatures and where it hit these kids at a time in their life. And it's kind of a range. It's not all in the same, not on the same crosshairs. And so at the beginning, like I said, it's, oh, this is cool attention. This is nice. We're finally getting recognition for something that we thought was dead. This is great. Oh, I'm important. Like, you know, it's a nice ego stroke. But then you realize that the authenticity of these people is absolutely genuine. And then you realize, like, oh, this isn't about me. This is about something a little bit deeper and much bigger. And it's about you connecting with them. And now that even grows. And so once we started, and we realized that as a group, and I certainly realized that as an individual, that once you realize that, then it became a whole other new experience. And then you're going and people are waiting in line to tell you their story. Mm. And all the stories are very similar, but they're all very different, very individual. And then you realize that, like, you're a part of something that not very many people get to be a part of.
Yeah.
And it's you know, and then you get to the point where you have to, then you appreciate that, and then you get to a phase where you respect that, and you want to make sure that, you know, that remains.
Are you surprised that this film has not been remade yet?
Well, they were. So I'm not surprised now. And then that, you know, so a lot of people don't know, like after the DVD came out, the Lionsgate version in 2007, and then, you know, sold a gazillion copy. I don't know, you know, it was a lot, made a big impact. We benefited nothing, but that has nothing to do with us. But it helps resurge the movie because everybody has their DVDs now. And it's a new medium that, you know, everybody now can take their own old worn out VHS and put them, you know, on the shelf, and now they can watch it on DVD. After that success of the initial DVD, Rob Cohen, who everybody knows from Fast and the Furious movies and the Mummy series and things like that, he's a giant, you know, producer and studio director. He was actually a very young producer on the Monster Squad. And when he saw this resurgence, he was like, oh my gosh, we have to reboot this movie. And so he teamed up with Michael Bay's company, and they were going to reboot and remake Monster Squad in like 2012, 2013. And that they ran into all sorts of problems because they couldn't crack the story. They couldn't get, you know, writing teams to kind of bring something to the table that, you know, was better or different than what was there. Because the hard thing to do is update the Monster Squad. And what they ran into is you're not allowed to make this movie anymore with kids in it. What we did in this movie, kids are not allowed to do on screen anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And it just wouldn't work. And it's, you know, the language, the setting, you know, the things, you can't be around the danger, you can't be around the guns, you can't be around the you know, explode, like you can't be around this peril. And I'm like, why not? That's dumb. It's like make movies that people want to watch. But really what it was is they couldn't really kind of crack the story, I don't think. And different writing teams, I've ran into different writers and teams and writers like, yeah, we put our pitch in there too when they were trying to put it together. And one of them went into like turnaround for like a year. And I think the delay, it all worked out fine because the delay ended up getting into the year that Universal announced their Dark Universe. And they were bringing back all their classic individuals. What most people didn't realize is that they had already released their first movie in the Dark Universe before the announcement of the Dark Universe. It was Dracula Untold, and that didn't do very well. And but once they announced the Dark Universe, and then they Platinum Dunes, and they're like, well, if Universal's bringing back those characters, we don't need to reboot the Monster Squad as a off studio thing. So the project died, and everybody celebrated. And then the Dark Universe came out with Dracula Untold, and no one saw it or no one liked it. I guess they thought it was not a great movie. And then they went and doubled down on the second one, and were making The Mummy, and they needed Tom Cruise to come in to, give some start. And that movie I thought was pretty good without the Tom Cruise character. His character was completely unnecessary, and I'm a huge Tom Cruise fan. I will not besmirch that. Tom Cruise was unnecessary in that movie, and that movie bombed. And so the Dark Universe died. So the reboot died because of the Dark Universe, and the Dark Universe died. And they finally, almost, it took 7-8 years or more. They finally started doing those titles the right way for current, which is basically the old school way, because the better old school creature features are the Universal classics and their sequels that were lower budget, smaller scale, had to do it on the quick, and without these gigantic kind of studio machinations behind it, as well. Those those old 50s remakes and those 40, those were all good movies. And then the Hammer movies out of and the movies out of England that had werewolves and vampires, they're all the kind of these like smaller budget B movie type things, told by storytellers to get something in and tell it and make it good and get it out. And they started Universal got they got lucky and got smart with their connection and partnership with Blumhouse, which that's right up their alley, is to give big stories to new storytellers and new filmmakers with smaller budgets, and you get so much better quality when you have smaller budget. It's a weird oxymoron that people don't really get. Because you have to drill it down. You have to make it fundamental, elemental, and essential, and you don't have all this extra stuff to play with and stuff to muck up your movie. It's bare bones and it's good. And look, they made good movies like at a Blumhouse. Like, I mean, I guess now we're getting The Wolfman with Ryan Gosling. You can't get a better lead. You're getting the number one movie star besides Tom Cruise out there to be in your werewolf movie. Everybody loved Invisible Man.
Yeah.
And that was Lee Whannell. And because Lee Whannell's a good storyteller. Everybody doesn't realize Lee Whannell's, you have Lee Whannell because in Saw, and everybody loves Saw, things like that. And, Lee's a cool dude. And I think that's the right way to go with these big, kind of these old classic creature features, is to put them in a smaller box and let people enjoy them more, because you can do more with less.
Finally, we're at the end now. Finally, are you working on anything new that you can tell us?
I can say that, yeah, I am working on something with my guy Henry McComas and Wesley Caldwell. It's a very cool genre project. It's an anthology feature. Not allowed to say who it's with or who it's being put together with, but it's perfect segue, because once we can, I can come back and we can talk about this on your show. This is much better. I'd rather come back twice than just tell it once, right? So see how I did that? I also have my degree in public relations, in marketing, but I don't. Well, kind of, I don't. But see, look at this. So it's segue. There's some cool stuff coming out. There's ironic. There's a couple of movies that came out this year that I have a connection to and bit in, that an old friend of mine, Nancy Leopardi, was producing and directing a few. I'm actually in a scene in one of them. There's a really cool kind of social horror / contemporary, what really, wealthy people will do to other people, including their own family. It's called The Cure, and I love it because this again is a smaller kind of creepy. It's not a creature feature. It's sort of like it's not even dystopian. It's like right now, kind of almost like science tech horror, body horror type, messing with somebody idea. And it's the lead girl, and it's great, and the two parents that are just awesome. It's David Dasmalkian and Ashley Greene, from the Twilight series and a bunch of other, and Des Malkin's just an awesome character actor that is now becoming a leading guy. And I loved being around those two because I worked production on this movie for my friend, and then I'm actually in a scene, so I got to be in a scene with them, which is even better. But that's coming out, I think, this week, called The Cure. I just love those two. Because we're at conventions and stuff together, and I actually got to do. I was like, wow, I'm getting to work on a movie with Ashley Greene from the Twilights, which I think is, because of the Monster Squad era and the success of Monster Squad is why we have things like Twilight. It's an ensemble group of kids. They're a little bit older. They're much sexier. I get it. And that helps, when you hit the right audience, because everybody's good looking in Twilight. And, they had 13, 14 sequels. It was amazing. And I think that's something I always ask, people ask about Monster Squad is, I didn't know it bombed at the box office. Why did it bomb? And, we actually look at that in Wolfman's Got Nards, the documentary, a little bit of, why it didn't. And we learned stuff that I never knew. It's fascinating. But I do think it was a product, or it was a result of why Monster Squad didn't succeed at the office. One, when they released it, it was 2 weeks after the Lost Boys. Lost Boys was a much cooler vampire movie for an older crowd. But Monster Squad, I think, it was the marketing campaign ruined it for the 9 and 10-year-olds, and it wasn't cool enough. It was a little too kid oriented for the 15 and 16-year-olds or older. They all went to see Lost Boys. And so you had this small window of like 10 to 13, 14-year-olds that, had they known that was a thing at the time, those are called tweens now. Those are called tweens. And they make movies and TV shows specifically for that demographic now. And I think we made the first tween movie ever. I could be wrong. I want someone to tell me there's another example, but we made the first tween movie, and they didn't know it. And had they understood it and marketed it to this specific audience like they do now, Monster Squad would have been a huge hit, and we would have made like Monster Squad 7 Breaking Dawn, like last year or something. We would have just had so I think that's it's fascinating to see, not just on the impact that the people made this movie, but that this movie had on the industry, unbeknownst to most people. And when you start pulling threads, you realize that there's connections and reasons. A lot of people, a lot of stuff that's made in the last 20 years has a touch and a hat tip to Monster Squad, if not direct lifts. But I think the popularity of book series, things like Twilight Zone, Harry Potter's in a different category of itself. Those are some of my favorite movies of all. I think that whole world is fantastic. I don't like that they're remaking it, because it means two things. One, I got really old, and two, that I'm a curmudgeon and I don't like people messing with things that I dig. But Twilight, and then of course things like Stranger Things and stuff like that, all have a hat tip to that style and what we did back in our day.
Well, that is it. That is the end of our interview.
Well, hopefully it was worth it.
It was definitely worth it, believe me. You've told me so much that I didn't even know about the film, so that's like enlightened me a lot more about appreciation it, like even further now. But yeah, if by all means, if you ever want to come back on this channel to promote anything new, like you said, a project you're working on, if you want to come back on, I am more than happy to have you on here. So please just let me know and I'll have you back on. No problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And, always stay in touch, and, your listeners and your viewers stay in touch with me, vice versa. And, I can't, if you're based in the UK, I dig it. I love coming back there. We haven't been in a number of years, but London loves Monster Squad. I love London. I love, we were in Manchester for, a couple of times. It was great. There's a lot of Monster Squad fans in the UK, so it's awesome. And then there'll be fans of the new stuff too. So I can't wait to get back. We just have to find a reason to get back there. So someone invite us.
And that's it. That's the end of our interview. I would like to thank Andre Gower for answering all my questions. I've had an amazing time chatting with him. And again, thank you so much. As always, I'm Antwood Movie Mania. This is Andre Gower, and we will see you in the next one. See you later.